The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch by Ronda and David Armitage. Do you think this story might be about boys and girls? Have a guess, look at the front cover. What clues could you use to help you predict what the story is about? Once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Grinling. At night time, he lived in a small white cottage perched high on the cliffs. In the daytime, he rowed out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. Mr. Grinling was the most industrious lighthouse keeper. Come rain or shine, he tended his light. Sometimes at night, Mr. Grinling lay sleeping in his warm bed. The ships would toot to tell them that his light was shining bright and clearly out to sea. Mr. Grinling's lighthouse would help all the ships know where the rocks were, where they needed to stay away. Important job. Each morning while Mr. Grinling polished the light, Mrs. Grinling worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting a delicious lunch for him. What do you think the word concocting means? She's concocting a delicious lunch for him. She's making something, isn't she, in the kitchen? Once she had prepared the lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it on the wire that ran from the little white cottage to the lighthouse on the rocks. So they got a special system. But one Monday, something terrible happened. Mrs. Grinling had prepared a particularly appetising lunch. She had made a mixed seafood salad, a lighthouse sandwich, cold chicken, sausages and crisps, peach surprise, looks delicious, iced sea biscuits, drinks and assorted fruit. She put the lunch in the basket as usual and sent it down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. Scavenging seagulls, really, really hungry, looking for food. "Clear off, you varmints," shouted Mr. Grinling, but the seagulls took not the slightest notice. "This is an excellent peach surprise, boys." "She's a great cook, Fred." "Scrumptious lunch, Tom." That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls, to confuse them. "Tomorrow I shall tie the napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Grinling. "Of course, my dear," agreed Mr. Grinling. "A sound plan." "They'll have to try harder than this to stop us, Bert." On Tuesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains for another plan. "They're a brazen lot, those seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "Brazen indeed," said Mr. Grinling. "What shall we do?" "Our cat does not appear to like seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "No, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch." "A most ingenious plan," agreed Mr. Grinling. Can you see the speech marks? Do you remember what they are for? They tell us when somebody's talking. Hamish did not think that this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and hissed as Mrs. Grinling secured him in the basket. There, Hamish," said Mrs. Grinling. "I'll have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home." He doesn't look happy. Sadly, flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed. His whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. "Pretty kitty, like a piece of lobster." "This food gets better every day." "Aren't you going to chase us, Kitty?" "Lackaday, lackaday," said Mr. Grinling sadly. "Meow, meow," agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for a new plan. "What shall we do?" said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. "I have it," she exclaimed. "Just a mixture for hungry seagulls." "Indeed, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "What have you in mind?" "Wait and see," said Mrs. Grinling. "Just wait and see." What do you think her plan might be? She needs to keep away those pesky seagulls, Class 2. "Mustard sandwiches," chuckled Mr. Grinling. "A truly superb plan, my dear. Truly superb. Oh, mustard sandwiches. I don't think they're going to like those." On Thursday morning, Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them off down the wire to the expectant seagulls. Yuck! Ugh! Ack! Her plan has worked. On Friday, Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. "All right, boys, let's go and have lunch elsewhere." "It's time. It's the same as yesterday's lunch, Fred." So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, a jubilant Mrs. Grinling put away the mustard pot before she prepared a scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. While he waited for his lunch down in the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through his telescope. And this is what he saw. "We'll fly back here for lunch again tomorrow, boys."
"No mustard in this lot, Tom. This is a delicious chocolatey clear, Fred."
Uh-oh, the poor boatman, the fisherman. He's going to have no lunch.
"Ah, well, such is life," mused Mr. Grinling, as he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine.
"Look, my own habits, he's happy. Lots and lots of food for him to enjoy that the pesky seagulls stayed away from. Good job, Mrs. Grinling. Do you think you could design a story map like we do in school to tell me the story of the lighthouse keeper's lunch? Video yourself talking me through your lovely images. Diane.